Hey guys, Mr. P. In this video, we're going to talk about atypical cell structures in eukaryotes. So in previous videos, we've talked about cell structures in prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and now we're going to start talking about some of those situations in which cells don't really follow the same typical cell structure pattern. So this video all about atypical cell structures, and specifically objective A229, which is atypical cell structure in eukaryotes. We're going to look at a variety of cells that follow this atypical cell structure, like aseptate fungal hyphae. We're going to look at red blood cells. We're going to look at phloem, sieve tube elements, and skeletal muscle on our way to kind of understand how these cell structures work in eukaryotes and why they are atypical. So the first thing we have to do is kind of revisit or review the typical eukaryotic cell structure patterns. And so we know that cells are bound by a membrane. That membrane consists of a lipid bilayer. That lipid bilayer is made of phospholipids and has membranes embedded within them. Eukaryote cells have membrane-bound organelles. Those organelles are things like the mitochondria, the nucleus, the nucleolus, the lysosomes, ribosomes, Golgi apparatus. Inside of a typical eukaryotic cell, DNA is found in the nucleus, and in the case of prokaryotes, it's contained within the nucleoid region. ATP production occurs at the prokaryotic cell membrane and the eukaryotic mitochondria. Both prokaryotes and eukaryotes have the ability to produce ATP because all cells require an energy source. Cells are either aerobic or anaerobic. Plant cells contain chloroplasts and are photosynthetic, while animal cells do not possess chloroplasts and are therefore not photosynthetic. Cells have all the machinery for DNA replication, RNA transcription, and protein translation, meaning all cells have the ability to replicate their DNA molecule. All cells have the ability to transcribe that DNA into a readable RNA message and then can turn that RNA message into a protein product. Cells contain enzymes to catalyze biological reactions. That is the purpose of metabolism. Metabolism is the sum total of all catabolic and anabolic reactions in a cell. So catabolic plus anabolic reactions equal metabolic reactions or metabolism. Cells are the basic unit of life. That's one of the cell theory components. And cells possess all those properties of life that we talked about, like homeostasis, metabolism, nutrition, movement, excretion, growth, response to stimuli, and the ability to reproduce. Cells have cytoskeleton to provide shape, structure, and support from the inside, but some cells have atypical structures which allow them to carry out specialized functions. And so if you get anything out of this video, I want you to get this bullet point. If a cell contains an atypical structure, they are probably possessing that structure to form the ability or to possess the ability to specialize and do a specialized function. So, what are some of these atypical cell structures? You see a variety of pictures here. The first are our red blood cells. So, red blood cells are very atypical, and when you look at them, they have a shape that is very flattened. We've talked about in biology across the syllabus several times that a flat shape typically has an increased surface area to volume ratio. And so these cells have the specialized function of transporting gases. They transport oxygen throughout the body. They also transport CO2 or carbon dioxide throughout the body. These cells are specifically designed and adapted to increase their surface area, to have a structure that increases their surface area to volume ratio that allows them to diffuse oxygen into them and diffuse CO2 out of them very efficiently. They contain substantial amounts of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is an enzyme that is responsible for the binding of oxygen and carbon dioxide to the red blood cell itself. Erythrocytes, or the red blood cells, discard their nucleus and mitochondria. So these cells are actually produced with a nucleus and mitochondria intact, and they discard them, which creates this kind of depression or divot where the nucleus and mitochondria used to be. And when they discard them or remove them, this depression increases the surface area while simultaneously reducing the volume. Since this cell lacks a nucleus, it therefore, by definition, is one of those atypical cell structures, because we know that animal eukaryotic cells should possess mitochondria and should possess a nucleus, but these don't. But it does it to maximize surface area and decrease volume because they are designed to transport gases. By decreasing their volume and simultaneously increasing their surface area, they allow the diffusion of gases, the O2 to come in and the CO2 to leave, which is fundamental in the cellular metabolism or the cellular respiration metabolism at every cell in your body. So when this red blood cell is traveling through all of the capillaries and gets to every tissue cell in your body, it has to give the tissue cell oxygen and take the CO2 from the cell so that it can then return to the lungs, take more O2 because it lost its O2 to the cells, uptake more oxygen and get rid of the CO2. That's why you inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. So why is this atypical? They do not have a nucleus or mitochondria, but they are free-living and are examples of eukaryotic cells, which we know that by definition a eukaryotic cell has a nucleus. Next, we're going to look at the hyphae. So these are fungal hyphae cells. This is the way that a fungus or a mushroom or a mold is going to be structured. So aseptate fungal hyphae have long filaments called hyphae. So multicellular fungus produce these really long filaments called hyphae. And the purpose of these long filaments is that they consist of really thin chains of what essentially are cells. These are multicellular organisms, so they are possessed of multiple cells. But they're separated by these cross walls that have pores to allow various organelles and cytoplasm to flow from cell to cell. So you'll see that in these septate hyphae, you have all of these individual cells, much like you are structured. All eukaryotic multicellular organisms are structured, but the difference is they have these septums, which are kind of these little cross walls that gives the illusion it's made of multicells, and it is, but they have pores in them that allows a lot of these materials to transport between them. So they don't really behave like individual tissue cells that are oriented into organs, much like our cells are. So why are they atypical? They have many nuclei throughout the continuous cytoplasm. It essentially makes every single one of these compartments a continuous section of the same cell because they share the same cytoplasm. Each one of these little sections has its own nucleus, which means if it's sharing all of the cytoplasm and essentially one cell, it is multinucleated, so it has multiple nuclei within the same cell. If we compare that to an animal cell example, this would be muscle cell tissue. Muscle cells, which are oriented into really long chains called a muscle fiber. And so skeletal muscle fiber cells contain a bunch of individual cells that have been fused into a really large, strong cell. So this individual cell, that is the muscle fiber, functions to specialize in body movements. It allows multicellular organisms like us, humans and other animals, to contract the muscle fibers and move themselves, which not only allows them to avoid predation, but also allows them to secure and find food. So the presence of specialized proteins arranged in bands that contract and relax. In this video, we're not going to go into muscle contraction per se. I just want to highlight that skeletal muscle is an atypical cell. You will see that on the surface of an individual muscle cell, you see all of these nuclei. So again, muscle cells are very large. They are really long. In fact, they are as long as the muscle is, and they are attached to bones on either side of the muscle. That's how muscle contraction works and allows your body to move. So they're very large and have many nuclei. So this is another example of a cell that has been specialized to be multinucleated, but is an example within an animal, not a fungus. And the last example we're going to focus on are the sieve tube elements. So this is a particular plant tissue sample. The phloem sieve tube element is a vessel contained within plants in plant stem. This is the vessel that sap will move through, and it has a specialized function that allows the transportation within a multicellular plant. Again, it has individual cells that line this tube, but it contains a phloem that is essentially a fluid that is shared by the entire organism. There are these little sieve tube plates which serve as kind of like a colander, which gives structural rigidity from the inside to this so that it doesn't collapse, but it also kind of filters out some things as the phloem moves up and down the plant. So it contains minimal cellular components such as nuclei, ribosome, cytoskeleton, and cytoplasm, and can only remain alive with the help of these companion cells, which maintain a close connection with the sieve tube elements. These sieve tube elements are cells, but they've essentially lost most of their cellular components and can only be kept alive by these companion cells, which are essentially providing it with the things that the cell needs in order to remain viable and alive. They're connected end to end, forming long tube structures. Again, it increases surface area, decreases volume. These really long tube structures are a way that you maintain large surface area to volume ratio, and we see it throughout much of the biological world on our planet. And so why are these particular cells atypical? They are eukaryotic, but don't possess organelles, and therefore would not be able to remain alive without the help of these companion cells, but they have been structured to allow them to function correctly, and that keeps the plant alive. They just can't keep themselves alive and require these companion cells to help do that for them. So 4 examples for atypical cell structures. They all are atypical for a variety of reasons. The red blood cells are atypical because they do not possess a nucleus or mitochondria, and they are eukaryotic cells. The fungal hyphae are atypical because they are multicellular organisms, but essentially function kind of like a really large multinucleated single cell. Muscle fibers are really, really long, really thin, and possess multiple nucleated. So this is another example where there are multinucleated within animal cells. And then you have these sieve tube elements, which are eukaryotic cells. So they should possess all of the endomembrane organelles. However, they lack the endomembrane organelles and therefore need to remain viable by these companion cells in order to remain alive. Other atypical eukaryotic cell structures that we see throughout the biological world is nerve cells, which are really, really long and thin and have a ton of branch connections at each end to transmit electrical impulses. These are the way we send electrical stimuli from our brain to our muscle cells in order to cause our body to move in really prescribed ways. We also see sperm cells that have numerous mitochondria for energy production and a head containing an enzyme that facilitates egg penetration. We're going to talk more about this when we get into sexual reproduction, but that is a atypical cell structure that we don't typically see anywhere else. But that cell has a very predictable and very prescribed function, and it needs to be structured in order to allow it to function correctly. And then we have ciliated epithelial cells that have many hair-like structures on one side of them. And those are called cilia, and they are on the exterior that work in unison to move mucus and other particles up and out of the airway. We also see villi, which are structured the very similar way in our small intestines, which help to, again, increase surface area to volume ratio so that we can absorb a lot of nutrients from the digestion of our food as it moves through our digestive system. So, a variety of atypical cell structures. Make sure you understand all of the atypical cell structures and the functions and the very specialized functions that each of those cellular structures are designed to do. That's it for this video. If you learned something, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the video. We'll see you next time.